Hi, I'm Jim.
And I'm Kate, and welcome to episode 10 of the Creative Content Studio podcast. How are we, Jim?
Yeah, all right. We've had a little week away.
We have. It was half term.
It was half term. Leg gate rages on.
It does. An update?
Out of the cast and into a boot.
It's pretty big.
Massive boot.
Big news and a big boot.
Yeah, like some sort of, I don't know, like a grey stormtrooper.
Which our son loves, as you can imagine. But
yeah, so 10 weeks of that. I won't bore everyone with the details, but many weeks of that, and then hopefully I'll be out of the boot and I'll be able to begin to resume normal life.
Yes, fingers crossed.
In some capacity, with a bit of physio and stuff.
Progress has been made, though.
Yeah, worse things happen at sea.
Yeah, that was also coined in the last episode, I believe.
I don't know if I coined it. I think it's a long-standing phrase.
Okay, well,
it's my mantra at the moment.
Back. Yes.
It's the way to think about it. There's no point dwelling.
Now and next as well.
Now and next.
So episode 10, we are talking about how to grow your audience.
Okie doke.
So obviously, I think the last episode was about hosting and publishing and the ways and wherefores of that. Mm-hmm. So how to get your podcast out there, but then once it's out there, how do you grow your audience? So in 2025, how would you advise people go about growing the reach of their audience?
It's a broad start.
It is.
How would I go about advising them? Well, I'd say like the first thing to think about is leveraging your existing audience. So what I mean by that is if you've already got an audience that's built either in a mailing list, either on a Facebook group, on social media, on a particular platform, maybe you've got a lot of TikTok followers or Instagram followers. If you've already got a group somewhere, whether it's the mailing list or whatever, then leveraging that group is a way to start. Those people are already hopefully fans of yours in some way. They're already showing up for you in some capacity. They're either showing up to read your emails, or they're showing up to watch your TikToks or watch your reels on Instagram, whatever it is. So leverage that audience. Tell them about your show. Ask for their support. Ask them to spread the word about your show as well. Those are the kind of key things I'd say. I mean, we can get into like the detail of each individual aspect of those, but in broad terms, I'd say if you've got nothing at all and you're starting from a flat playing field, leverage the audience you've already got, number one. And then think about, as I always say, the content's kind of king. So the content has to be good in the first place. So hopefully we've got really good content. And then after that, you need to make that content as discoverable as possible. And again, we've talked about this sort of thing before, search terms, etc. That's how people are finding shows most commonly at the moment. They're still finding shows through searching, just simply for a subject they're interested in. So if you're talking about subjects that are niche enough, as we've also talked about in previous episodes, so you've got all those foundations correct, and you've got the kind of the SEO, if you like, of your podcast down. So you've got the search titles correct for your podcast platforms, and so they can be discovered on social media and they can be discovered on Google and stuff. When people search for that subject, hopefully your podcast is coming up as a hit. Then those things will all help you. But I really like that idea of leveraging an audience you've already got.
Okay, perfect. And obviously, once to try and get your show discovered, and also, like you say, leveraging the audience you've already got, you want to let people know it's coming. So things like teasers, trailers, that sort of things, audiograms, are they all still worth it in 2025?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, same principles as we've talked about before in terms of like video being the key aspect to all of this. If you can get some video of your show, even if you don't record the whole thing normally on video, it's just an audio format. If you can have some video where you're teasing an episode that's coming out, I think that's a great way to do it. Audiograms, I think in this day and age, you get out what you put in. So I think if you're only doing an audiogram, and it's like for those who don't know, maybe you're new to podcasting or haven't heard of what an audiogram is, you've definitely seen one. They are a still image, usually with a waveform on.
As soon as you said it, I was like, I know exactly what you're talking about.
And they were really common in the sort of I suppose the days where social media was a thing, but and podcasting had been around. People were starting to promote their podcasts on social media, but they weren't actually videoing them that often. So video podcasting wasn't as common. And so people used to tease their episode with clips from their episode, that kind of thing. So those still work, but video is just, infinitely better if you want to get engagement. And like we've talked about before, you've got to understand the game that particular social media platform wants you to play. If you're making content specifically for promoting your show on that platform, Instagram wants you to play a certain game in terms of length, in terms of viral hooks, in terms of like pattern interrupts and all those things that if you searched for how do I get attention on social media. So, and that may divert you a little bit from your podcast plan. It might well be suited to like a long form show, but then you have to think, how do I turn this piece of 2-hour content, it might be, if you've done a 2-hour interview, say, how do I turn that into something that plays the game that Instagram wants me to play in order to promote it? And we've all seen loads of clips, people make clips of the actual episodes themselves and they tease them and they give hooks within those. So, there might be a cliffhanger type moment or a question that's controversial, and then you see the guest kind of like, sort of wrestling with the question. Diary of a CEO is the one that everyone kind of like references at the moment. And, the team who work on that show are excellent at making clips that make you intrigued as to the episode. You're asking quite a lot of somebody, really. You're asking them to see a clip on social media and come out of that particular journey that they're in, find your show somewhere else, and then listen to it for however long you've made it for. Like I said, maybe a 2-hour interview. So there's a game to be played there if you're trying to do that on somebody else's on another social platform, which inevitably you will be.
So following on from that, you talked about social media and the kind of games they want you to play. What role does social media and also short form video take when trying to get your show discovered? Yeah,
so I suppose the obvious answer is, I'm using it to promote my show. But actually, I think that there's kind of two sides to that particular coin when it comes to like what role does social media play in your podcasting journey, as it were. And it all comes back to like what your intention is with your show. Everything does. We've talked about this on loads of episodes so far. Your intention with your show, what you're trying to get out of it, is the key to what your social media clips are doing. Are you trying to get people to listen to your podcast, watch your podcast? Or are you trying to get more attention online generally? And if you're trying to get more attention online generally, then you can go all in on using that piece of long form content, as in your podcast, to make the clips that the social media platforms want you to make. Because what you're trying to do is not necessarily get somebody out of the platform in that particular scenario. You're trying to keep them on the platform they're already on. You're just trying to make them follow you on Instagram, or you're trying to get likes, or you're trying to get them to click maybe a link on a bio, because that's where you can book a session with you if you're a business owner. So it depends on the game you're trying to play. So I'll give you an example of this. I've got a client at the moment who, on the analytics side of things, when it comes to their actual show, you would say that their show is fine for where it is, as in it's early in its kind of tenure as a podcast. It's growing from a fairly flat basis. This person wasn't a podcaster before. They weren't on another show and have reinvented. They haven't been on anybody else's podcast. So if you talk about podcast listeners listen to podcasts, they haven't shown up in that space ever. So therefore, it's fine that they are where they are. They're growing. But the clips that they've made have done really, really well online. And they've got them lots of followers, and they've got them clicks on their bio, and they've got them all the things that they wanted to get out of it connected to their business objectives. So in that particular case, you can ask, what's the intention with your show? Is the intention to get you ultimately more business? Or is the intention to have a really successful podcast? And their intention really is to get more business. So if they're just looking at the metrics of whether their podcast was successful as a measure of whether the thing that they're doing, the activity that they're doing, as in spending time recording themselves and blah, 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 is worth doing, the answer to that question is yes, it is worth doing, because ultimately it's getting them the end goal. It might be going in a slightly different route. They probably thought, when I start a podcast, my podcast will be successful, and then that will mean that I get lots of business. But what's actually happened is you've made a long form piece of content that you've cut up into social media clips, and the social media clips have got you more business.
What's become their marketing strategy in a way.
Yeah. It's actually just a way to have got them on camera.
Yeah.
Because they weren't comfortable being on camera before, and they weren't making that sort of content, that sort of, social media, the game that they're playing on their particular platform requires you to show up in person, a talking head, saying your views on things and letting people into your world. And they weren't comfortable doing that before, and the podcast has allowed them to have an avenue where they've got lots of opportunity to put their face on the internet ultimately.
Awesome. Okay. And you talked about, the clips were successful and it got them maybe some more followers on their social media, obviously likes and some engagement as well, audience engagement. How do you go about getting reviews and likes and shares from people, from listeners, from viewers, once your podcast is out in the world?
So directly for the podcast itself. So reviews are generally important. I should probably just explain that aspect for people, just so that we're everyone's on the same page. So it's really important that you can get early on, ideally, if you can keep getting them, that's great. But good ratings, good reviews on your show. And most podcast platforms have a mechanism for listeners to do this. So on Apple Podcasts, for example, there's a 5-star rating. And when you click on the 5 stars, it then gives you a little text box to fill in, and you can say whatever you want about the show. And usually within about sort of 24 to 48 hours after you've published your comment, it will then appear on that person's podcast page on the platform. So if somebody else goes to search for the show, they can see the reviews and they can read all of the reviews for that show. So they're publicly available. It's not just you talking to the host. The podcast overlords in Apple and Spotify and whatnot put all of that data. So they put in, how long have people listened to it for, how many people follow this show, as in that means subscribe. Just for new podcasters out there. So lots of the podcast platforms changed the sort of parlance from subscribe to follow recently. It means the same thing. So how many people follow, how many people listen, which might be different because you could listen without following the show, which is fine. How long did people listen to the show for, as in the episode? So did they listen to the whole thing, or did they listen to 10 seconds and then check out? All of that, together with the ratings and reviews, all helps Apple Podcasts and Spotify and so on decide whether your show should chart is the main criteria. It also can help with whether they return it as a search when people search for something that's connected to you, or connected to the thing that you're interested in. But the key thing is the charts when it comes to Apple Podcasts and so on. So. And they deliberately are opaque with this, so they don't say specifically what weighting they give to each of these things. If you go on the Apple Podcasters page, they will say these are all the things we take into account, but the exact details of the algorithm we use is sensitive information, so we don't share it. But they're important ultimately. They're also kind of social proof. They're proof to other listeners. If they are looking at your show, they could discover a new show and they see 50 reviews and all 5 stars and people raving, or thousands of reviews if your show's bigger. They tell somebody it's worth listening to.
Yeah.
So they're all helpful. How do you get them? Is I suppose your question, and how you go about getting them.
Just ask people.
There are many varied ways, but I mean, ultimately, you're asking people.
Yeah.
In whichever way you do it, you're asking people. One of the most successful ways to do that, again, leveraging the audience you've already got, is ask your listeners on your show at some point during your show. If you've loved the show today, it would be great if you drop us a review. 5-star rating and a review on Apple Podcasts, that sort of thing. Close out your show with that sort of thing. That's a great thing to do. You could even call to action. You could even put it in the opening of your show if you want. Yeah, a little call to action. Key thing here, I'd say, if you're doing this across like social media platforms and so on, and I say it across social media platforms because you can show people how to do it, or you can link people to the right place to do it, is tell people how to do it. Because a lot of the times I think people say rate the show, and people don't necessarily know how to do that, how to physically do it. You know, if they're perhaps new to podcast, or perhaps they're not new to podcast, they've just never
reviewed a show before,
or found any particular reason for it. I mean, there isn't necessarily a benefit to the listener in doing it. It's fairly altruistic thing, but I will come on to that in a second. The gain is in for the podcaster, so they don't, what's in it for me kind of thing. Why would they do it? So do help, handhold them through it. If you're doing a story on Instagram, for example, make sure you've put a link, or maybe a little screen grab type video that explains this is how you do it. You click this, you click that, you click the other. That sort of thing's really helpful. Mentioning it on your show, like I said, that's really helpful. So the other thing to think about with this is you could, if you want to, and I've seen lots of podcasters do this, incentivize your reviews. So you could well do a giveaway on social media through your podcast. So you might well say, leave a 5-star rating, follow the show, and you'll be entered into a prize draw. Any reviews that we get in the next 7 to 10 days, or in the next 2 weeks, or before the next episode, or whatever it is, the winner's going to get a free podcast t-shirt if you've made merchandise for your show, or that kind of thing, whatever it may be, or they're going to get a shout out on the next episode, or that sort of thing.
You're just quite open about it, quite blatant.
100%. Yeah, everyone does it now. Everyone does it, and you see people do it on YouTube. You see people do it on every social platform. People are saying, like this, because everyone by this point in our sort of collective as a society journey into the world of the internet and social platforms, we all understand that we're at the mercy of algorithms set by big tech companies, and we all understand that those are driven by engagement, and one of the things that exists that shows our engagement is leaving reviews for things. So yeah, it's no different to how it really helps a restaurant if you give them a review on TripAdvisor or on Google, whatever. It's the same thing.
And how have you or us as a studio, as a business, helped some of our clients grow their audience? I mean, you mentioned your client earlier, who has been very successful through clips and through social media. But the analytics of the actual podcast, don't necessarily reflect that success. But that is entirely depending on attention. So how have we helped others in that regard as well? Any examples you can give? Well,
I think the first thing that goes back to is helping people clarify their intention in the first place. I think lots of people say, I've lost count of the amount of conversations I've had where somebody has said, I have been told by insert branding manager, social media manager, management consultant, that I should have a podcast. And then I'll say, why?
What's your why?
What for? What? And I don't mean that to say I don't want the business, more just to help with the kind of the process and
we need to know what their vision is.
Yeah, exactly. Like what if you're not clear on the intention, why would anyone listen to this show? And so many people aren't clear on that. So I think helping them with that, then helping them with content that actually is engaging, being that independent person to edit that content as well. I think sometimes people who host podcasts can either go one or two ways. They can either want everything cutting out because they're kind of not very confident in themselves, and that's no good. Or they can want everything leaving in because they think everything that was said was absolutely amazing. And sometimes you need an editor to tell you it wasn't.
To find a middle ground a little bit.
exactly. You know, like you can think about some of the best films you've ever watched. You know, that how much footage was shot that is left on the cutting room floor. To use the sort of
I was
analog,
going to say that's the old school,
the analog
expression.
But there's lots, and super fans of that film would be like, oh my god, how could they leave that out? But actually, like the average person watching this film didn't want to see 25-minute conversation between two of the lead characters that went on for ages and explained everyone's backstory. It just wasn't necessary, so they got rid of it. So editing, really key. And then I think it's just helping people with the kind of the strategy with the clips and so on. So making your clips really engaging.
We talked about branding and colours and
branding,
music,
colours, really, really simple things like, and lots of new podcasters just don't maybe necessarily realise this if they're not. They see it online, so they must know it's a thing. But I think when it comes to you making the content yourself, just subtitling your clips. It sounds obvious, but like it sounds obvious to most people, I'd imagine. But 80% plus people are looking at their phone with the sound off, so they're reading your clip more than they are listening to your clip. So you have to have subtitles as a matter of course. And then thinking about like the attention span of on social media of your audience. How quick are they to switch off? So in the first few seconds of the clip that you're posting, is there something that hooks them in? And it could be like a visual hook. So you're seeing lots of this on social media at the moment. This is where I talk about, and I'm reluctant to, although I am doing it now, get into the science of the game playing of the different platforms, because this stuff changes. But you're seeing lots of it in social media at the moment where somebody will walk into frame, or they'll pick something up, or they'll be doing something strange as a pattern interrupt, so they call it. So the idea is that you're scrolling and your brain is expecting certain things. It's expecting a podcast clip to pop up now, because we've all seen them, with two people talking, or a big close-up on somebody with the words pinging across the screen. That's what it's expecting. So if it's expecting that, it's really easy to just scroll on past it. So you have to interrupt that pattern with something. And that could be as simple. I saw somebody the other day, for example, who was just eating a banana.
What, before sitting down and talking on a podcast, or just?
So they weren't on a podcast, but they were doing a piece to camera,
right? And
they just finished eating a bite of a banana, and they were holding this banana, and excuse the connection, but our chimp brains, our sort of primordial, whatever the word is, I never know which one it is, but our primitive brains, because we are all ultimately a primitive species at the end of it, especially with social media, we're kind of like in this sort of stupor almost when we're looking at these things sometimes. Well, at least I am. Maybe I'm judging other people. But we're wondering what's going on with this banana. Why is this person eating this banana?
Why has he filmed himself eating a banana?
Why has he got
put
this
it on
banana
social
in his
media?
hand? And that's just enough to stop you scrolling. It's all it is. It's all it's designed to do. I saw another person who had a can of Sprite and a
Affiliate?
knife. No, but they had a can of Sprite and a knife, and the can was on a chopping board, and they were talking about something completely different. It was about something to do with marketing. And
isn't that distracting from what they're saying? Because I'm wondering what you're going to do with that can of Sprite and the knife.
And it stopped. It did
Stopped
enough
you.
to stop me in the scroll, so that I was like, "What is he doing with this can of Sprite?" And then quickly you realise, because he then jumped to other scenes where he's doing other weird things, that it was nothing to do with what he was doing. It was to do with what he was saying. So it got you then by the end of it were like, okay, interesting. So I'm not saying you bring a banana to your podcast recordings or you bring a can of Sprite, but what I'm saying is think about when you're making the clip, or if you're enlisting somebody to do it, hopefully they'll do this for you. Thinking about those first few seconds, how are those first few seconds going to help stop somebody? And it could be that you've said something controversial. It could be that the way that the cuts are made. So you might do a crash zoom. So what that means is you kind of go from really far out to really close in. So something that just is a visual stopper, visual hook. So those kind of things can really help. And those are some of the sort of tactics we might have employed with different clients over the course of time. Not bananas and Sprite cans, but
we haven't gone that far yet.
But thinking about, you know, what the first few seconds of a clip could be to help them promote that. Other things could be, you know, if they're posting on YouTube, then, you know, again, understanding that game for them. So it could be, you know, the SEO on the clip, could be the thumbnails. You know, we'll make the thumbnails for people, for example. And so the thumbnail that I would make for their YouTube channel would be quite different to their podcast cover, you know, because again, it's a different game we're playing. You know, on YouTube, we're doing something different. It might even be that we've cut their content up for them for YouTube. So as we've talked about before, YouTube sometimes doesn't, well, it won't necessarily like a 1 to 2 hour podcast if you're not well known or the subject isn't very interesting to people, because that's a long time to get people engaged for. And their game is all how long, their game is all about how long people are watching the video for. So if you've got an 8-minute video, you might do a lot better because, you know, watching 4 minutes out of 8 minutes is 50%, and, you know, 4 minutes out of an hour is not 50%. So that could be another example of how we would have helped a client to do that. So cut the content down so it's right for the platform that they're doing. Make the clip maybe a little bit more incendiary than maybe it was. A little bit more explosive than maybe it was in the actual conversation. And most of these clips, you know, you see like I said, the Diary of a CEO clips, you see the clip and you think, oh my God, that must have been
so many effects on those though. So dramatic. That
must have been a really controversial conversation. And then you listen to the context of the conversation. It was really interesting, but it wasn't necessarily controversial.
So it's like a facial expression as well. Just like maybe like a something like that. And then or something a bit shocking.
There's a little facial expression from him sometimes. So the guest will say something and then there's a little,
and you're like, well, I've got to find out why was Steve so shocked
why was
by something.
Stephen so shocked? Why was he so taken aback?
I mean, I'm not that worried.
You're not that interested, but I've done
other people.
I've done it at times, you know, if I've been interested in the guest or the subject.
It's drawn you in.
Where I've seen the clip and then thought, oh, I better listen to that one.
You're a right sucker for this stuff, aren't you? You stopped at the banana, you stopped at the Sprite can.
I'm
love it.
The king of the chimps when it comes to being stopped in my
banana.
Being stopped in my primitive tracks. I'm quite easy to pat and interrupt. Easily pleased, yeah. So those are some of the things that we would do. But I mean, it's a massive subject. You know, you could get into everything.
Yeah. It's pretty wide ranging.
The sound, the look of the show. I mean, all of these things contribute to whether your show's going to do well or not.
And every show has a tone and a voice and a different type of branding and colours, and so it's completely individual and all very bespoke when it comes to the editing side, isn't it? So
yeah.
Cool. I mean, I think that was it on this subject.
That's all we've got to talk about for this week.
Yeah. Episode 11. We're nearing the end of our little series. Next week will be about monetization 101. So obviously, again, though, goes back to depending on the client or the podcaster's intention. Is this something you want to make money from? And if so, what platforms are useful for that? What to avoid? What kind of tips and hints on that kind of thing, really? So that's what we'll be covering next.
Glorious.
Yeah. Can't wait.
That's that. See you next time.
Take care.